So, all right. So today we have a very specific lecture. Maybe not many people are interested in frogs, lizards, and snakes, and other reptiles and amphibians. However, I will try to make it more or less interesting for you as well. And I will just start with my childhood. And here is a city of Tbilisi, how it looks on a Google Earth map, you see. And this is just between the eastern outskirts, eastern foothills of a lesser Caucasus mountains on one hand, on one side, and on the other side there is a big grassland and semi-deserts which are going eastwards to this extreme southeastern Georgia and farther to Azerbaijan. And here is the center of the city and a yard where I have been, where I have grown. And just from this yard, I remember my first memories are about like animals which appeared from time to time in this area. So one of these animals was a green toad. Actually, in that time, it was like a middle 60s. The traffic was not so strong in the town. And here was located this Vere Park, which is, again, which is still there now, but it was much more forested and much more, wild place here. And toads used to come through this street, this Akhlediani street, and actually sometimes they came into the yards and so on. And this is one of the first my animals which I have looked. Once I caught one poor toad and put it in a glass can with water, so it rejected to eat anything I offered her, and then I released her in like 1 week. Here is this green toad and how it looks on the asphalt, on the just city ground. It is one of the commonest amphibians in Georgia, and you see here its egg clump, which looks like a long string here, and it has a very specific voice, like maybe you will hear it somewhere here in Tbilisi, and just you remember that this is a green toad. And just with years, I used to discover vicinities of our town. This is a turtle lake. You also probably have visited this once or more times. And here are the first reptiles I met in this area. This is a middle lizard, quite big lizard with a blue neck and with a green back. And this is a European glass lizard, Pseudopus apodus. So before I saw these reptiles, I used to read about them something in some popular books. And we had an excursion, I think it was like 1969. So my classmates have seen this and they started shooting, crying that there is a snake. And I told them, no, it's a legless lizard. And actually this was my first like serious experience with herpetology. And I am starting with description of reptiles of Tbilisi vicinities, not because I have grown here, but because it is a very specific place, and diversity of amphibians and reptiles is higher here than any other parts of Georgia, which look much more wild and which are quite different, and you need a lot of time to reach the places, somewhere in mountains or in deserts and so on. But near Tbilisi, you can find a vast majority of our herbs. Here are some of them. Well, everybody of you, of course, knows this lake frog, Pelophylax ridibundus, which lives all throughout the Central and Eastern Europe as well, and which is actually very common in ponds and pools, at the shores of the ponds and pools. Our recent genetic studies showed that our frogs are not the same genetically as ones you find in Eastern Central Europe. They are closer to Middle Eastern Pelophylax bedriage. Also, it's not distinguishable from the frogs by appearance, which you see in other places. And here you see two most common maybe snakes of our area. This is a just dice snake or water snake, water ring snake. You find it everywhere here in Turtle Lake and Lisi Lake and Tbilisi Reservoir. They are quite common. They are feeding on tadpoles of frogs and toads and sometimes on the fish. And this is a small snake. You won't find it northwards from the Caucasus. Its name is Eirenis modestus or modest Eirenis. It's a dwarf snake. Its maximum length is like a 40 centimeters, maybe 50 centimeters, the biggest. And it is a very attractive guy. You know, you find it sometimes in the Turtle Lake under stones or just outside the stones if you go there in a not very hot spring day. Of course, you probably also visited Lisi Lake, which is not also far from here. From this place, and this is actually magic. You can find all kinds of reptiles in vicinities within the lake and outside it, and on the rocks on the slope just behind the lake. Here you find, for instance, all three species of turtles and tortoises of this region of Georgia and of the Caucasus. The commonest one, and unfortunately used by many people as pets because they cannot properly care about it and it commonly dies, is a East Mediterranean tortoise, Testudo greca. It is a quite big guy, so it's like about 30 centimeters long with a tall carapax, and it is a terrestrial tortoise. And within the lake you find two species of aquatic turtles. One is European marsh turtle. You can find it everywhere, actually, in Western Europe and in the southern part of Eastern Europe. And here there are two different subspecies of it. One is in the Eastern Georgia, another in the Caucasus, in the Western Georgia. And this is a Caspian terrapin. So a very beautiful animal with a bright yellow stripes along the neck and along the head. Unfortunately, currently, if you go to Turtle Lake, you rather will see some red, how it's called, red-eared turtle, which is just imported from the North America and which is commonly used as pets, and many people just cannot take care about them and just they release it in natural ponds. We don't know yet whether they successfully breed and whether they compete our local turtle species, but potentially is quite a danger for them. It is also actually the vicinities of Lisi Lake and some snakes you find in its surroundings. One of those, like a modest dwarf snake, I already showed you on previous slides. So you see how it looks like. And there are some others, some really bizarre creatures like this cat-eyed snake. This cat-eyed snake is, it has a vertical, actually, how it's called? A pupil, yes, pupil. It is a nocturnal animal. It feeds mostly on small lizards and other reptiles. And it is considered to be partly venomous. Actually, it is a sort of venomous snake, but its venomous teeth are located in the depth of the mouth. So before, for poisoning a victim, it needs just to chew it first. Otherwise it is not able to do so. It is considered to be not very dangerous for human because it's difficult to bite it with this hind teeth. However, once I was bitten by this snake just here, just in this place. So it showed it exactly, and after that I saw the two clear holes of its teeth, but however, nothing happened. It was like maybe a result of a maybe mosquito bite. And these two big red snakes or racers, on one hand, they maybe look, well, they don't look similar, they are quite differently colored. This is a Coluber schmidti, or former Coluber jugularis, and its taxonomic status has been recently elevated. It is a red-bellied racer, and it is extremely aggressive. It is big. Its length is 1.5 meters and sometimes up to 2 meters. It is, if you see it, it starts hissing immediately and starts jumping quite high, maybe just on the height of your, higher than your knee. And it actually sometimes makes a fear for people which are around. It is assumed normally as a quite dangerous and poisonous snake in the countryside. However, it is not poisonous, it's not dangerous, but it is aggressive. And like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I was walking in some other place and I saw it, I wanted to catch it. And it managed somehow, because I was in short trousers, it managed somehow to, you know, to just make me scared a little bit intuitively. And before I am jumping around it, it managed to just go somewhere in shrubs. And here is another big racer. You also find it sometimes behind the on the grassland behind the Lisi Lake. It is a formerly Elaphus quator lineata, then its status was elevated to Elaphus auromates, like a steppe red snake. And now geneticists show that it is very different from ones you find in like steppes between like Black and Caspian seas, and it is called now Elaphus urartica. Actually, it is an extremely friendly snake. It is extremely friendly snake. It's very popular among pet holders. It just takes food from the hands, and they also have a different ways of killing the enemy, not the enemy, but the victim. So the Dolichophis, the red-bellied snake, it just squeezes mice or lizards to the ground and just swallows it, sometimes swallows alive, whereas the Surartian snake or blotted snake, it always just stringents the victim, similar to some boas or some similar. And sometimes I have seen this snake also in reeds along the riverbed. It goes there and it hunts actually eggs and young chickens of small birds which are nesting there. So it is specialized mostly on mice and warm-blooded animals. For this guy, it is indifferent. It's everything. This Tarbophis phallax is mostly reptile eater, and finally, this dwarf snake is eating sometimes lizards, but mostly insects and other arthropods. And those guys are also found in Lisi Lake. I have shown already two of them to you. This lake marsh frog and a green lizard, middle lizard, it's called. But there are also some others. And here is a It is called sand boa. I don't know why it's called sand boa, because it doesn't live in sands. It mostly lives in rocks which are located in grassland place. This is a single small boa you can find in the Caucasus. Its length is up to 50 centimeters approximately, but it is very, you know, it looks like sausage actually if you take it. The head is not really separated from the body. It has also vertical pupils. And another one, it can look for you like a worm. This is a blind snake. You will never see it unless you will turn many stones where it is hidden. It is thought to feed on ants and maybe other small insects. And it has a very reduced, very small eyes. So in the first turn, you never see this eyes. You might think that it is a worm. And if you have been any time in tropical countries, there is indeed a family of rainworms which move like snake and which look extremely like this blind snake here. So first time in a tropical country when I have seen such a worm, I thought that this is a blind snake, but it was just a worm. And this is a representative of a very interesting group of rock lizards. It is called Kura lizard, Darevskia porchinsky. It is a single rock lizard, single representative of this family of very small lizards, which you find here in the city of Tbilisi. In vicinities, you can find a couple of other species of this group, but it represents an interesting group. I will devote some part of my lecture to these rock lizards because they are interesting for several very specific reasons. This is also snakes from Tbilisi. And you see here, here is a Transcaucasian racer. One you can find. This one is actually, this image is taken in Borjomi Gorge, about 100 kilometers west from us. But you can sometimes see it in Botanical Garden. The same as in Botanical Garden, you can also find the worm snakes, these blind snakes and dwarf snakes. And this is a Hemorrhois ravergieri, they call it now. It is a sort of strange name. It was Coluber formerly, but scientists, for some reason, actually decided to call it Hemorrhois. I don't know why. It is quite aggressive. It belongs actually to the same family as this red-bellied snake. Also, it is a bit smaller. And in spite it is non-venomous snakes, sometimes there are records of strong allergic reaction on the bite of this racer. So this wounded racer, I think it's, if you translate its name to English. Another racer you can also find everywhere around the city, although not so commonly, is a olive racer. So it is a very thin and extremely fastly moving. So when it is young, it has a very spectacular blotches on the sides of the body, but then when it grows up, it becomes almost unicolored. And two interesting lizards. This one has a very fragmented distribution, and you find it only in very particular places. For instance, south of the Lake Kumisi. This lake, I am sure you have never visited yet. Also, it is not far from the city. It is about, I don't know, like a 20 minutes driving from here. But it is already located in this steppe grassland landscape. And you find a variety of reptiles here, and among those, this snake-eyed lizard, Ophisops elegans. So you see, it has a strange, like a curious eyes, because it doesn't have eye slits, different from the most of lizards and similar to snakes. quickly running. This is a small guy, and actually, if you don't search it specially, you will never see it. And this one you probably will see sometimes here in the town. This is a Caspian gecko. It is considered to be a sort of alien species, not completely alien species, because its natural range goes along the western coast of Caspian. You can find it in southeastern Azerbaijan, and then you find exclaves of this gecko in Tbilisi, and actually the first they appeared in Tbilisi sometimes in 50s, and now they are in Kutaisi and in all more or less big towns of Georgia. So, but this is a specifically synanthropic animal. It lives on the walls, it lives on the old houses, and normally if you find it somewhere in the house where you live, you shouldn't just try to catch it and release somewhere in nature, because it is local. Here, of course, they are also amphibians, and you are familiar already with two of you of this spectacular, the nicest toad, green toad, and this lake frog. Actually, you can see their appearance, and you can compare their voices. And this voice, the voice of a lake frog, is very rude, like wow, wow, wow. Whereas this has a very nice, distinct voice. And you will never see, however, this adult amphibian. This is a Syrian spadefoot toad, and the most of life it spends hiding itself and digging itself in a clay soil. Sometimes you see only nose from it, but you will not see it unless you are just specially searching for this toad. And here are egg strings of the toad and egg string of this Syrian spadefoot toad. It belongs to a completely different family of tailless amphibians. It's very ancient family. Actually, there are only two species of this, a common, or three species of this. One is a widespread European spadefoot toad. Another is a Eastern Mediterranean, the Syrian spadefoot, and in Iberian Peninsula is the third species. But tadpoles of it are very interesting. This one is a photo of not very big tadpole of a Syrian spadefoot. This is a tadpole of a green toad. It is a black and small and with pointed nose, whereas this guy has an egg-like body, and in length, actually, it goes up to 20 centimeters, with tail, of course. But the body is only slightly smaller than a chicken egg. So it's like a small chicken egg, or maybe, I don't know, egg of pheasant, of some other galliform bird. And you find this toad also in vicinities of Tbilisi. In Lisi Lake they breed, in Kumisi Lake they breed. Also, you can only see their tadpoles. You are very lucky if you have seen an adult animal. And further, so finishing the Tbilisi thematics, I cannot stop on these two charismatic animals. One is a Caucasian agama. You can see it on the rocks around the city. You can see it on the rocks behind the Turtle Lake, and спасибо. And rocks near the Lisi Lake, and everywhere where you find the rocks. Actually, you might have an excursion to Uplisiche once. It is like a near Gori city, Gori town. And if you go there, you see a lot of these lizards just wandering around the rocks and around these old buildings. They are a big, serious lizards, a little bit similar to some iguanas from North America. Their Latin name is Paralaudakia caucasica. And interesting fact, which not many people know, that before the Easter, we have actually day after tomorrow, we have a Easter, and a couple of weeks before Easter, in Tbilisi, it was a traditional celebration called Jojoba. Jojo is a Georgian name of this Caucasian agama. It has a specific name, and it was believed to be a protector of people which are in different positions, which are in prison or which are in a complicated travel or war and so on. And the ladies of these people, of these men, actually used to come to to the old town. You know where is Essen to Avlabar district of Tbilisi. They are rocks. They are like now you cannot find lizards there, but they were quite common there about 100 years ago, like in the 19th century or beginning of 20th century. And they used to bring some food, and they pretended that these lizards will eat this food, and then their relatives will be safe. Actually, it was a good sign when a agama had looked at your eyes. So this is the old town of Tbilisi, and this is one of its symbols. So this lizard, this Caucasian agama, Jojo in Georgian. And it is also another image, just by the way, of old Tbilisi. It is a guy like a snake trainer, or how it will be, I don't know, a guy with snakes. And the snakes are really Levantine vipers, gurzas. So you see it has some of these gurzas just hanging around his neck and so on. I suppose it's quite dangerous occupation, unless they perhaps could remove their poisonous teeth. I don't know whether they did, but this is a very interesting image. Actually, I find it somewhere in the internet. It is a Tbilisi of like 1890s. And when you go west of the city, I show that Tbilisi is located between these foothills of the Lesser Caucasus, Trialeti mountain range, and this big grasslands. And it's in more arid setting, in more grassland and dry setting. It's surrounded by shrub landscape and grassland landscape. But to the west of it, the forest is starting. And it is like if you go to Tskhneti, it is a small town just west of Tbilisi, or to Kojori, you find a proper forest there. And the herpetology, you find there a specific herpetological fauna. However, it is much more similar to European one. You find here the slow worm, its English name. It's another species of legless lizard, different from European grass lizard. It lives in a forest area in more humid and colder places. It is a smooth snake, Coronella austriaca, one of the most common harmless snakes, mostly feeding on lizards as well. And some other species which are a little bit different, and you find it in Europe, but not everywhere. For instance, this nashorn viper or sand viper, it is a close relative of Vipera ammodites, which is found in Balkans and west to Central Europe to Austria. And here is the species Vipera transcaucasiana, which belongs to the same species group as the sand vipers of Europe. Also, it has a bit different coloration, and it is found only in the Caucasus and in the eastern parts of Turkey. All others are more or less the same. It's like a sand lizard, Lacerta agilis. You find it everywhere in Europe, and a common ring snake. And a common tree frog. But what I must say, that actually another trick of herpetologists, they elevated status based on some genetic data, the elevated status of some of those amphibians and reptiles which look very similar to your European ones. Now we have here Anguis colchica, so a colchis slow worm, and we have now here Hyla orientalis instead of Hyla arborea, which is a oriental tree frog. They look very similar to European ones, but some genetic studies show their a bit separate position, and I will actually discuss this briefly a little bit later. And of course, here is the prettiest newt in the world. This is a banded newt, and this is also one of my childhood impressions. We were wandering around the town with a friend, and we have seen a small puddle. And this, you know, it was like a late April or early May. I don't remember exactly. And there were such pretty creatures, you know. I actually recognized that this is a banded newt, but I didn't believe that it is. I have seen it on the painting, but I never believed that it is a really so beautiful in nature. Of course, I caught one of these nice males and brought it at home, where I had a terrarium with a big lake frog. And in the next day, I have seen a lake frog very satisfied and no newt. And somehow I understood what happened, and I put the fingers into the frog's mouth and took out the newt, which tail was already digested, unfortunately, and it died. So the frog swallowed newt. Also, it looked also almost the same size. Here are two other newts, a close relative of European big-crested newt. Here it is called Triturus carolini, or eastern crested newt. It is found in Balkans, northern Anatolia, in the Caucasus and northern Iran. And here is a land smooth newt. You also find smooth newts everywhere in Europe, but about 20 years ago or less, maybe 15 years ago, it was a group of scientists from Poland and other countries which studied genetics of smooth newt from throughout the range, and Carpathian newts, which look quite different, which is a separate, was since a while assumed to be a separate species. And they find out that the genetic difference between European smooth newt and European Carpathian newt is smaller than between European smooth newt and Caucasian smooth newt. Also, they looked quite similar. Later, it was proved that it is not the full story, because it appears that the Carpathian newt actually lost its mitochondrial DNA due to permanent hybridization with the smooth newts there. And this is the result of their genetic closeness, and not their real evolutionary closeness or phylogenetic closeness. But this is a specific story. And now we are going from Tbilisi to the southeast, perhaps to, if you have no chance to travel to this savanna, actually in the southeast of the country, where Vashlovani protected areas are located. If you go there, you will believe that you are somewhere in Africa, you know, and there you expect zebras and antelopes around, but they are not. They are only wild boars. And well, recently they were reacclimatized some jayrans, you know, the goitered gazelles. Or if you have a problem with a car, you can just travel somewhere to David Garegi. Here are the arid areas. Mostly you will see there the same reptiles as you see in southern or eastern surroundings of the city, of Tbilisi city, but you find some extra species which you will not see here. Well, here is a Levantine viper. You already saw it on the neck of this guy with mustache. And this is a single, maybe real dangerous snake which you find in Georgia. You know, the name, regional name of it is Gurza. It's in Georgian, in Russian, so in all languages. It is quite big snake with its length normally is like a meter 40, meter 50, but sometimes they say they find individuals up to 2 meters long. It is quite venomous, quite poisonous, and quite aggressive. And therefore, if you go to these places, just be careful. Just it hisses normally if it sees a human, and therefore don't put your leg on this snake. Uh, and it has a very mobile jaws. Still, I used to actually catch one of these snakes when I was maybe 18 years old. And I wanted to film it and just put it again into a sack, but I was not good enough and it managed to bite me in that time somehow by making its teeth almost on the 90 grade angle from the mouth. This is much more rare type. This is a Eastern Montpellier snake. It sounds very strange, the Montpellier snake here in Georgia, however it is. It is a group of snakes which is found all throughout the Mediterranean countries. So it is like the English name is a lizard-eating snake or something, yes. And it is similar to cat-eyed snake. It is a conventionally venomous, so its venomous teeth are located somewhere here in the hind part of the mouth. Different from this cat-eyed snake, it can be really dangerous in case it manages to bite a human with its venomous teeth. It is very fast, and we have, I think Andro has one in our university actually. It is very nice guy, very mobile. It permanently looks around, permanently reacts on everything you see there. And also if you go, you see there also another dwarf snake. It is much smaller than the first I have shown you already. It is a colored dwarf snake, Erenis colaris. You find it is probably not sufficiently dried for it in the vicinities of Tbilisi, but you find it in the southeast of the country. And you see some other snakes if you go to grasslands. This is a steppe viper. Now it's called Vipera erivanensis. Also, actually, it is very similar genetically to Eastern European Eastern steppe viper. You find in Ukraine, southern Russia, and in like Romania and other places. Well, no, I think Ukraine and southern Russia and in the Caucasus. And this is Elafe. Now I think it's not anymore Elafe, or it is Elafe dione. It is a steppe red snake called, and it has a very interesting range going from a far east, from the Pacific Ocean, almost from the Pacific Ocean, to the Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. And sometimes it is not very common, but sometimes you can see it also in the grasslands east of Tbilisi. And more, actually, those guys are also very typical for extremely dry areas of southeastern Georgia. They are running lizards or racers, genus Eremias. So here are two species. More commonly, you see this Eremias velox or fast lizard. It has a nose pointed upwards a little bit. It looks like a crocodile if you look at it just from this side. And it is Eremias arguta, so like a eyed lizard, which is much less common, and it is found even in less, even in more actually dry places. And here is unbelievably fast lizard, which is called long-legged skink. First time it is a little bit bigger than a big green lizard. However, it is extremely agile. It runs very fastly, and it is a real challenge to catch it until you just put some trap or something. And this is a lizard which nobody's seen. On the other hand, it was a Georgian herpetologist, Mikhail Bakradze, who found this Ablepharus pannonicus, this miniature, very small dwarf lizard in Vashlovani Reserve. But since then, nobody have seen it in Georgia. I'm sorry. Oops. And now we are moving from the east to the western part of Georgia, in particular to Caucasus forest. And in one of the previous lectures, I was speaking about refugial areas which are considered to be the Caucasus as it is, but which are actually several separate refugial areas within even like western part of the Caucasus. What means refugial areas? During the Ice Age, during the glacial period, the most of Eurasia was either, its north was just covered with ice and snow about 20,000 of years ago. And the other parts are covered with like a dry, cold desert, like similar to tundra maybe, but even drier. And it has some faunas, but these faunas was very poor. And of course, the question arises how we could have so many species now. Actually, they couldn't evolve just within the 15,000 of years. And the reply is that the glacial period was not even throughout the land cover, throughout the Earth. And there were some places protected by specific climate, protected by mountain ranges and so on, where the landscape, which existed since, no, I wouldn't say dinosaur time, but very long, many millions of years, was maintained, and it maintained also all variety of plant and animal species which were there before glaciation. Now, you see higher diversity of species in Central or Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, but this is the result of species which have been expanded from this refugia during the last 15 years when the last glacial maximum has been finished. Interestingly, there are not so many such refugia, but in Georgia you have 3 of those. One is the biggest, and it is also proven by paleobotanical data, is located just at the boundary or at the border of the current boundary of Georgia and Turkey. It is an area with extremely high humidity. You have like a rainfall level up to 4,000 millimeters per year. And it is a real rainforest. Also, I wouldn't say it's a real subtropical, it's a sort of temperate rainforest, but it is a rainforest. Like in a tropical climate, you find there almost no soil, so it's just a bare clay and plants growing on it. And you find many interesting plants and animals and insects and everything there. Now it is a UNESCO site, like a Caucasus protected areas, and it is a system of protected areas like a Kintrishi Reserve, then it goes Mtirala National Park and Machachela National Park, and just on the other side of the border it is a Jamili National Park in Turkey. Interestingly, that there are also at least 2 other refugial areas which were separated during the glacial age from this one, and one is in the western Greater Caucasus, and it is proved by you have some species which are endemic and specific for this area. You cannot find it in other parts of the Caucasus, or maybe the same species sometimes you find in other parts are genetically distinct. And the third is covering more or less the current Borjomi-Kharagauli National Park system. One of my old research was a genetic research of Caucasian salamander, We will speak about it later. Well, this is how this Caucasus rainforest looks like. No? It looks pretty similar to like some pictures of like Amazonian forest or something like that, just from a first glance. But this is mostly presented by chestnut and beech in higher elevations and some other trees. And here are those relict animals which survived only in refugia. One of those is Caucasian salamander. It is still tricky to find it. It lives exactly at the coasts of small brooks, small mountain brooks, small streams. And it is like, it has also a Georgian name, which is like Unahvela, so the animal you never see. It is such a nice black with yellow spots. And I mentioned the research I did like in late 90s. And it was about just genetic comparison of the salamanders throughout their range. And it appeared that salamanders from Batumi area and from Turkey and salamanders from Borjomi area are not distinguishable externally. They look very similar, they are the same. But genetics says that those guys were completely isolated from each other, at least for 15 millions of years. Yeah, it's like still non-understandable for me, but it looks like there were climatic period when this area, which is currently more or less covered with forest, was just unpenetrable. And now, if you just see the distribution of the rainfall level, you have a very high rainfall level here east of the south of the Black Sea, and then this rainfall level declines slowly eastwards. But then in Borjomi Gorge, it increases again. So they are like at 2 points with a high rainfall level and humid areas here and here. And it appears that the salamanders were really strictly isolated from each other by geography. And during this, in the course of time, they aggregated lots of mutations, which currently differ them.
Do we know anything about the change in the rainfall patterns over the 15 million years?
We can only guess about this. This is an interesting question, actually, and I would like to, because until recently, the paleobotanical data, like palynological data and so on, they showed presence of forest during the last glacial maximum, just in this area, just roughly between Kintrishi and, well, even not Rize, so even just in the extreme northeastern Turkey. It was not proven, also there were palynological studies, that forests present elsewhere in Georgia or the Caucasus, and yes, well, the next refugium is like somewhere in the South Caspian, so at the border between Iran and Azerbaijan. But it is a concept of hidden refugia, of cryptic refugia developed, which says that actually there were many more refugial areas, smaller refugial areas, and simply you cannot reconstruct them based only on paleontological or paleobotanical data, because these data are not always just accessible, or not always the pollen is stored in a way that you can recognize the species. And genetics makes a great help in this respect. So, for instance, in our lab, we are studying like multiple animals and plants from different taxa, like amphibians, lizards, invertebrates. And if you see that the genetic difference between like this population and this population is fixed, first of all, if actually they were not here, you would expect that genetically salamanders from this area and this area would not genetically differ. And strong genetic differences suggest that they were survived separately in this area. They are also like species which are found strictly forest species, which you found also in like Western Greater Caucasus, in Abkhazia, Mingrelia, so everywhere in Western Georgia and Russian Caucasus. It is like a also they show that they are strictly forest, although they are not palynological data suggesting that forest presented there, but presence of this species suggests that it was. So otherwise they just could not survive. So this is actually the basics of logic about the distribution. So they are not paleovegetation data, but they are genetic data, and they are data based on climate modeling. It is also a popular approach now, and recent climate modeling showed that exactly, actually, the Western Caucasus was one of the most important refugial areas, at least in like Western Eurasia, and that it was isolated from refugial areas somewhere in the Mediterranean part of Europe. So another relict species is here, and it is a Caucasian parsley frog or Caucasian mud diver. I also like its voice. It's like, it's very silent, and you find it somewhere also in Borjomi Gorge, but also near Batumi, and in all forest belt of Georgia is to Lagodehi. What is interesting about these two species? They have, actually it is a almost monotypic taxon. It is a separate, like a Pelobates, I told you, like a spadefoot toad is a separate family, not frogs, not toads, not tree frogs. The same is true, and even stronger is for this Peloditidae. It is a family, very ancient family of frogs, and they are only two species. One of these species, which is living now in Iberian Peninsula in Spain and Portugal, is currently separated into 2 or 3 species, I don't remember exactly. And another is a Caucasian parsley frog, which is a giant form of this Iberian one. And it appeared that these two guys are closest relatives of each other. However, the distance, genetic distance between them goes back to almost beginning of Cenozoan era, so like 60 millions of years ago. They were thought to be like maybe 20 millions of years ago isolated, but there are some recent developments of this molecular clock method suggest that they are much older. They are like 60 millions of years ago. And actually, and interestingly, the Caucasian salamander has also a closely related golden striped salamander, and it is also living at the Atlantic coast of northwestern Spain and northern Portugal. So it looks like it was a ancient rainforest fauna going along all this Mediterranean archipelago. It was archipelago in that time. It was not a single continent. And the remainders, actually, of this old trans-Mediterranean fauna remained on one hand at the Atlantic coast, and on the other hand at the eastern part, eastern coast or eastern area of the Black Sea. Here are 2 other endemic species. It is a Caucasian viper, Vipera kaznakovi, found in western Georgia and western Caucasus, but also some populations of it are found in Borjomi area in central Georgia. And this is a one of these small rock lizards, Darevskia clarkorum, Turkish lizard. Now it is described as a separate species which is living only in Charnali Valley in Georgia, Darevskia driada. And it is just a single valley, unfortunately unprotected by, it is no national park or reserve or anything in the area of this lizard. Also, it is closely actually related to a Turkish lizard which has a little bit bigger range at the border between Georgia and Turkey. So those are these relicts of humid temperate rainforests of Caucasus. Also, of course, I would not equalize these two with these two. These two are real, very old relicts. And those ones have more or less close relatives in European vipers or in some other Caucasian lizards.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course, yes.
As for the Peloditis, does it actually live only in one of those refugial areas or in several of them?
You mean Pelodites? It lives in several. It lives in all actually forest belt of the Western Caucasus. It's from Ordu in Turkey. So Ordu is west of Trabzon. It's going to Borjomi Gorge along the Lesser Caucasus Mountains. And along the Greater Caucasus Mountains, it goes from like a Krasnodar area in Russia to Lagodehi, to like a Georgian-Azerbaijan border. So, but I'm sorry that I don't have genetic data on the differences between these. Yes, yes, that's actually, it's among many our plans, but well, you cannot do everything. Life is short.
It would be interesting to compare some other species which are also, like, which habitat is fragmented, and to see if the genetic distances are comparable.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's actually what we are doing, and I can actually tell you it's like a some summary papers about this issue. There are lizards which have similar distribution. There are snails which have similar distribution. It is a snail like a Helix buchi, a very big snail, maybe the biggest of non-tropical actually snails. And even bigger, no, I didn't, it's not like that. It is like, but Helix goderdziana, which lives in from Goderdzi, so in Ajara and farther in Turkey, the diameter of its shell is up to 7 centimeters. So it is big. It's a really big snail. So, and well, some look less bizarre and more similar to European species. And here you see it is a Caucasian common toad, Bufo verrucosissimus or Bufo verrucosissimus. You can consider this as a subspecies of a widespread, gray toad, yes, which is found everywhere in Europe. The same is this Anguis colchica. And here is Elafe longissima, Aesculapian snake, typical for southern Europe and for like western part of Europe. You can also find this in this forest belt of western Georgia. And of course, everywhere in the country you find this frog, Rana macrocnemis. It appears, it looks like a little bit like a common frog, which you find everywhere in Europe, or maybe agile frog, Rana dalmatina or Rana temporaria, or any other. However, it belongs to a different evolutionary branch, and it is more distant from all European brown frogs, forest frogs, than they are from each other. And of course, well, here are our Darevsky, our rock lizards. And this is a really, really specific group of animals. There are more than 30 species currently, nobody can count, described for the entire this group. And in Georgia, you find 15 species which are distinct, plus 2 species which are described, but I don't believe in their separatedness. So, you see, most of them are rock lizards. Most of them are living on rocks, in rocky clefts and such places. Also, it is this is not like joke that they are different. You really, in some parts, in Borjomi Gorge, for instance, you can go and you can find 4 and sometimes even 5 distinct species just sitting on the same rock. So, and considering this very high diversity of genus, and considering also limited range, which is a Western Caucasus, mostly a humid part of Caucasus, It is perhaps the most diverse, most specious group of non-tropical vertebrates in this area. So if you just take a diversity considering the, well, they are groups, they are genera with more species, but not so much concentrated on the same small geographic area. I will introduce you with some of them. So this is one form of Darevskia brownery. It's from northeastern Georgia. It's from Migrelia. This is a Darevskia caucasica, so a species which is found in the high mountains of the Greater Caucasus between like Svaneti and Azerbaijan and Dagestan. This is Darevskia dagestanica. Here you find it only on the northern slopes of the Greater Caucasus, just in the Kazbegi area and in Khepsureti and Tusheti. This is a coral lizard, which you find, no, this is not coral lizard I already showed you before, which you find here in Tbilisi. This is Darevskia mixta. It was considered by earlier scientists as a frog with a mixed origin. It was thought to be a hybrid species. Currently, it is not supported. It's not hybrid species. It's a separate species. Also, recently, in the last year, it was published a very interesting paper of a Portuguese scientists about Darevskia. And it was shown that indeed there is a historical or past gene flow between many of these species, limited. Also, they remain distinct. This is a most basal species, red-bellied lizard, very small one. You find it in Ajara and you find it in Borjomi as well. These two are Artwin lizard, the Ryugini lizard or forest lizard, and a meadow lizard. And those guys look more like Zootoca viviparos lizard, which you see in Europe. They are not rock-dwelling species, they are ground-dwelling species. But Zootoca vivipara doesn't exist in the Caucasus. And it is a nice case of a parallel evolution. One of my students is currently working in Zoological Museum of Bonn and doing a tomography of skulls just for exploring evolution of the rock-dwelling and ground-dwelling in different lizard groups. And Darevskia is an example. So it produced within a single genus different life forms also. And this one are Darevskia armeniaca, so Armenian lizard, and Darevskia dali, Dals lizard. And do you know why these species are interesting? Because they are parthenogenetic. They don't have males, and they produce clones, just females deposit eggs. From these eggs hatch again the females, and which are genetically almost identical to their mothers. So almost, because some mutations still happen, of course. But
can we assess how long they've been parthenogenetic?
Well, it was thought, it was a very prominent scientist from Leningrad, Ilya Darevsky, who first discovered these parthenogenetic lizards from Armenia in 1956. And actually, before that, it was no any case of parthenogenesis in vertebrate animals at all. So he was the pioneer in this case. And in 1967, he wrote a book, Rock Lizards of the Caucasus, and described these five distinct parthenogenetic forms. Now there are 7 such forms known already, so some new forms were discovered afterwards. And Darevsky thought in the time that they were like a post-glacial, that they are very fragile, they only lived for a short time and so on. But now a lot of genetic studies are done on this group, including our lab, actually our genetic lab, and it appears, based already on genomic data, that the lineages, first of all, they exist, at least some of these lineages exist more than million years. So they are like middle or early glacial period. So they survived multiple glacial cycles already.
Doesn't that actually mean that, well, they should not really be well adapted to the changing environment? And yet
it should mean so. And even like 13 years ago, we did an ecological study of this Darevskia dali, which you find also near Tbilisi, but the elevation like a 700 or 800 meters and higher. And it commonly coexists with its father species, this Darevskia porchinski. They live together. And actually, the study of several dozens of populations showed that there is a somehow negative correlation. So they are outcompeting their father species. They are stronger competitors because father species pays for sex. You know this. So it's like a, by definition, parthenogens breed twice faster.
the red queen paradox or something.
Well, red queen is something different. Red queen is about a coevolution of a host and parasite. Yeah, or predator and prey. So it's a coevolution of red queen hypothesis is about like a, you know, like a host permanently adapts to its parasite and parasite to host. And one of the hypotheses was that the parthenogens cannot survive this red queen situation, because if their parasites are recombinant, they can easier adapt and faster adapt to them than they can adapt to their parasites, and therefore mostly parthenogenetic lizards live at high elevations where parasites are not so common and not so diverse. Yeah, but they are really strong competitors. Actually, they by definition produce twice more offspring than the bisexual species. It's clear. And the idea was that they probably would not survive as you, exactly, that's what you told, that they could not survive probably a strong climate change, like a glacial cycle. But genetics says no, they survived quite many glacial cycles. And one of the interesting, actually, researches, and it was recently published in BioMSET Evolutionary Biology by our research group, it is like a genetic comparison of this Armeniaca and Dali, which are both parthenogen, which are distinct. They are distinct morphologically. They have distinct ranges and distribution. They have distinct ecological preferences. But it appeared that among a very variable microsatellite genotypes, we searched for like 10 genotypes, and it appeared that 3 out of these 10 genotypes in both the species are completely the same. And so coincidence is just excluded. And they were thought to be results before of hybridization between this one of Darevskia mixta, this one, and the Darevskia porchinski, and this one of also Darevskia mixta and another species, father species, Darevskia valentini. But now it appears that they are actually stronger related genetically to each other. And it was not two independent occasions of hybridization, but it was a hybridization which hypothetically produced Darevskia dali. And then from time to time, they somehow managed to produce fertile offspring with bisexual species. It is extremely rare because normally the hybrids are triploid and sterile. But it is a certain probability of their backcross. We don't know the way yet. It can be via a crossing of female parthenogens with males or via producing male parthenogens. We don't know yet. But mitochondrial DNA, so maternal lineage, is the same in these two species. But recombinant genes, among recombinant genes, there are ones which cannot coincide just by chance. And it appears that actually somehow this Dali-like common ancestor at some point hybridized with another Valentini, another bisexual species, and the Armeniaca is the result of this backcross rather than original hybridization between two bisexual species. And it was the first publication on this was in 2017, then in 2020. And now we are working with genomic data, and it appears that the hypotheses at least look like reasonable. Okay, now I would just go a little bit about history of discovery of Georgia's herpetological fauna. And you know that in many languages there are lots of words describing different plants. I'm so sorry. And there are lots of words describing like different bird species. But there are not many words about reptiles and amphibians. And somehow I wrote down, of course, now most of like Georgia's amphibians and reptiles have Georgian names. But however, these Georgian names mostly are produced by scientists like in 20th century. And those are just separate words which have obviously vernacular origins, so which exist because people knew about these kinds of creatures. Maybe Andro will help me to add something to this. And these words are, well, veli, so Georgian, which means just snake. Yeah, and it is a separate word, Ankara, which is a ring snake. It is a separate word for Hokera, which is a glass lizard. It is also considered to be snake, but it has a different vernacular name, clear vernacular name. And well, Bochnecha is just, you know, because in the western Georgia only slow worms, only anguis are living, yes? And Pseudopus is living only in the eastern Georgia. So there are two different words for eastern and western Georgia for this, but they don't distinguish between these two species. It is Khuliki, which is lizard, and it is Jojo, and you already know what Jojo means. It's a Caucasian agama. So it's just one word, which means sometimes they say like a Caucasiuri Jojo, so just translating it, but I prefer just to use Jojo because it is a specific name, specific folk name, which is specifically developed for this kind of creature. It is a word Vasaka. This appears to be a loan word from Iranian. In Iranian, Vazag means frog, and in Georgian, Vasaka means tree frog. It is Bagaki, just a frog, and Gombesho, which is toad. So also I suspect that Bagaki and Gombesho is not exact differentiation between frogs and toads, but between big and small frogs or big and small toads. And there are some derivate names like Tzlizgveli, so water snake, it's water dice snake, in fact. Tsiteligveli, so red snake, which is a Dolichophis schmidti. Yeah, it's a Gvelgesla, which is a viper. And in western Georgia, it is a special word, Tintila, which is commonly used along with Khuliki, and Khuliki means a green lizard, and Tintila means Darevskia, these are small rock lizards. So with Tintila, it's like something small, which is just running around. And all the rest is called like a Morieli or Zurbella, so which is a Scorpio or leech. So normally if you, now younger people, of course, they no words like a newt or salamander, but if you speak to an older generation with shepherds and so on, they normally call like newts leech, and they can call salamanders scorpio. And it's interesting that in other parts of the world, also in southeastern Azerbaijan, when I have been, they also call salamanders scorpios. I don't know how they look like scorpio, but maybe, you know, this image is something like intermediate between scorpio and salamander.
I also know one native Georgian.
Sorry?
word. I also know
Which one?
native Georgian word, mkhwari.
Mkhwari is, you know, mkhwari is frog. Yeah, now it is applied to the spadefoot toad. Yes, but originally mkhwari is just a synonym of frog.
Yes.
So it's not.
Native Georgian.
Yeah, it's native Georgian, but it's native Georgian word, but it is a synonymic, so it is not word which is specifically applied to this kind of species.
In Tusheti, they also say tlikwi instead of
Yeah, well, of course there are some regional words as well and so on, but this is just, I know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So like a 12 species are distinctive, you know, were distinct by a population. And here it's very interesting coincidence between some legends which I heard here and which I heard from people which were working in Africa, herpetologists. You know, in Caspi area of Georgia, people considered, I don't know whether they consider this anymore, it was like 70s, that green lizards are very dangerous animals, and that snakes are actually taking their venom when they eat green lizards. So, and they are somehow even more dangerous. I couldn't actually imagine how this legend could develop. Yes, it's nothing, it's just a harmless animal. Nobody is bitten by this snake. Actually, in this area, there are also not so many venomous snakes. It's like a rare sand viper, but I have strong doubts that somebody is just bitten by sand viper. It's hidden somewhere in stones.
from Caspian, I agree.
Yeah, so yeah, and I was really surprised when I heard from Wolfgang Böhme from Bonn about a story about Central Africa, where people are extremely scared of camellios, and they consider that the most venomous snakes, like black mambas and things like this take their venom from camellia when they eat it. So it looks like something, a legend which comes, which has a very strange and old roots, actually, maybe in areas where our ancestors came from. Sometimes, I don't know, 100,000 years ago. Okay, and now two words about discovery of the Caucasus herpetological fauna. And I would mention first of all these 5 names. Actually, out of these 5 names, at least one, Peter Simon Pallas, who worked in the late 18th century in Russian Empire, never has been in the southern Caucasus. However, and he wrote a very well-known book, Zoographia Rosso-Asiatica, this one. But he is peculiar because he described a lot of species of amphibians and reptiles from Eastern Europe, from the Northern Caucasus, and from steppes of Central Asia, which are present here and which were not described before by Linnaeus and other European scientists. Therefore, I mention his name as a critically important for this. I am not so sure. Actually, no. I think that he just studied and he discovered some species which you also can find here. Like lake frog, actually. Lake frog, interesting that Linnaeus never described lake frog, or Laurenti never described lake frog, but Peter Simon Pallas did. Rana ridibunda in this time. So laughing frog, you know, like ridibo is to laugh in Latin. And this is a Karl Eichwald, a person who worked in the Caucasus, among others, in Russian Empire in the middle of 19th century. He also made an important contribution into discovery of Caucasus herpetology. And more recent names, including Alexander Nikolsky. It's a author of an important book, Herpetologia Caucasica, published in Tiflis, in Tbilisi, in 1913, in a Caucasus museum, which is now Georgian National Museum. It's near the Freedom Square. And a Polish origin naturalist, Ludwik Mlokosiewicz, who spent most of his life in Lagodehi, which is currently a reserve or protected area of Lagodehi, and who maybe didn't describe species by himself. He was rather an ornithologist, but he collected a lot of individuals and sent to experts in different parts of the world. And of course, Gustav Radde. Gustav Radde is a person. He was born in Germany, and then he first his trips were in Iberian Peninsula. Then he moved to Russian Empire and made a huge travel throughout Russian Empire. And at one point, he created a Caucasus museum. So it was a mixed museum of natural history and human history, ethnography, and everything. And he was a director of this museum for many years, and he died in Tiflis. And he was member of the city council of Tbilisi at the time. He was ornithologist mostly, hunter, a great hunter and ornithologist. But of course, without his work, without his efforts, we would know much less by that time about amphibians and reptiles of the Caucasus. And here is approximately the input of different scientists into description of Caucasian amphibians and reptiles. And on the first place, of course, is a Carolus Linnaeus. Yes, Carl Linne. Of course, he never been here, he never been in Georgia, he never even had been in Russian Empire, but he described 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 out of 68 amphibians and reptiles we found here. So they are represented. I desperately didn't write modern names of these species. I wrote the names of their close relatives in Central Europe, to whom they are attributed. They were attributed until their taxonomic status has been elevated. And therefore, I wouldn't just, I think that it is a really important contribution. He even described like a gurza, like a Macrovipera lebetina, Levantine viper. And he described sand viper, Vipera ammodites, and he even described this red snake, yes, this Dolichophis schmidti, Dolichophis jugularis. It's just, you know, a big group of species to which this red snake belongs. And it also described a sand boa. I am not speaking about a ring snake and slow worm and other species which are very common in Europe. And another person of 18th century, which lived just in the same time as Linnaeus, a bit later, was Josephus Nicolaus Laurenti, an Austrian zoologist. And he described 5 species which you can currently find in the Caucasus. Finally, Mauremis caspica, the Caspian terrapin, was described by Johann Friedrich Gmelin. Neither of these 3 persons have been in the Caucasus, nor Peter Simon Pallas, who described another 6 species. So by the end of 18th century, you had how many? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24 species of amphibians of reptiles were already known by the end of 18th century here. None of these people were in the Caucasus. Here was I think Güldenstadt, but he didn't make important contribution into reptile studies. And then you see different names which described some individual species during the 19th century, and some are colored with reds, and those are Berthold, Vaga, Boulanger, Eichwald, Eversmann, and von Bedriaga. And why I colored the species in red? Because the species which are here were described from Georgia, so from the Caucasus, and particularly from Georgia. One of such species was this banded newt, and it was described from the vicinities of Tbilisi by Arnold Adolf Berthold in 1840s. I don't remember exact year, but it is like this. In 1870, Mlokosiewicz sent some Caucasian salamanders to Antoni Vaga, and he described Caucasian salamander from Abastumani surroundings in southern Georgia. It was Georges Albert Boulanger, a Belgian English zoologist, and he described quite a bit of species from the Caucasus, Rana macrocnemis from vicinities of Tbilisi. Karl Eichwald described Jojo, and from the Caucasus, and Caspian gecko. Eduard Eversmann described from the northern Caucasus a rock lizard, and Darevskia praticola, so the meadow lizard, and von Bedriaga described Darevskia rudis from Georgia. As I mentioned already, it was Alexander Nikolsky who made a first review specially devoted to herpetological fauna of the Caucasus, and here is just his book. Sometimes I bought this book here in a old bookstore for like 10 lari. It's now rare. I have it, and I'm very proud of this. And actually, in this book, they are described 3 newts, 1 salamander, 7 frog species, 3 turtles, 14 lizards, plus 8 subspecies of rock lizard, Darevskia saxicola, which taxonomic status was later elevated to a species level, and 21 snakes. Altogether, 49 species in 1913 related to 68 species which are currently known from the region. And well, it's a, maybe I will have a tea because maybe I make you a little bit tired now with these stories. Yeah, and 20th century, it's a very interesting epoch because it's very difficult to find something new on one hand, but it is very attractive actually thing to be an author of a new species, to describe a new species, and therefore the easiest way to discover a new species is to separate an old one into a 2 new or more new ones. Yeah, and here we have one exception actually. It is Rana macrocnemis and Rana camerani. Both are described from Georgia by Boulanger and Boedger. He described earlier this Syrian spadefoot toad. So macrocnemis was described from Tbilisi and Camerani from Tabatskuri Lake in southern Georgia. And this is the only species which has been actually unified into one Rana macrocnemis, and they are two actually ecological forms of these two. In other cases, you see, it's a common newt. It was like formerly Triturus vulgaris lanci, and now it's Triturus lanci. So it's a lance newt. Currently, we don't have a common smooth newt anymore in Georgia. It is a Triturus vittatus ophricticus, banded newt. We don't have any more banded newt in Georgia. We have Omatotriton ophricticus. So it is a big crested newt, Triturus cretaceous carellini. We don't have any more big crested newt here. We have Triturus carellini, so eastern crested newt, another species. We don't have Hyla arborea. And Hyla arborea, actually, we have two species instead, and those are really good species. It's a yellow lemon tree frog and oriental tree frog. I have some doubts in oriental tree frog. It is somehow genetically different from European ones, but you should expect this anyway. But Hyla savigny is a really distinct frog with a different call voice and everything, and they supposedly build a hybrid belt, so like a hybrid zone here in Georgia, in eastern Georgia. So like south of Tbilisi, you find this yellow lemon tree frog, even in some floodplain forests on the islands which are located in Kura River. And north and west of Tbilisi, you already find a common tree frog. Well, it's a common toad, which is now Bufo verrucosissimus. So also genetically, it was shown that they are mitochondrial DNA easily and back. Bufo viridis, so my favorite green toad is now Buphotes variabilis. Pelobates fuscus, actually, after Boedger described it, it is now a real species, Pelobates syriacus, and Rana ridibunda will probably be now Pelophylax bedriage, just as a result of these genetic studies. Well, here are the reptiles which were elevated. So it is a former Lacerta viridis. We don't have now green lizard in Georgia. We have Lacerta media, and we have also Lacerta strigata, two species instead of one green lizard. They are actually distinct species. Lacerta saxicola, about 30 species altogether, so rock lizard. Lacerta caucasica is now separated into caucasica and dagestanica, and by the way, genetically they are not closest relatives to each other. Anguis fragilis is Anguis colchica, and so on and so on. Here are two. Here is Ilya Darevsky, so with a skull of probably crocodile or alligator, I don't know. And well, of course, he is a very important person because he discovered parthenogenesis, he discovered new species of Darevskia and did a lot of research on parthenogenesis. And it is Ishenko, one guy actually with whom I used to work many years ago in Ekaterinburg's Institute of Ecology, who spent a lot of years exploring ecology of forest frogs in Urals and also here in the Caucasus, first of all in Armenia. And he made a lot of interesting discoveries. Unfortunately, he never really published many papers. 21st century is a century of molecular markers and social media. What is the result? Is explosion of new species, and new species in quotation marks. It is a molecular markers. Do they help or do they harm? Actually, it was thought when people started to describe and divide species into new ones many years ago, before molecular markers were widespread, since like 90s or 2000s. But always they were criticized, okay, did you study their genetics? And they find a very simple answer. They started to study genetics. You know, now everywhere in any good university, you have facilities which are sufficient for extracting DNA, doing PCR and sequencing. And of course, if you compare like two individuals of the same species from two geographically distant areas, you will find some genetic differences. You will find this in everything, starting with humans and finishing with snails. But this appeared to be a very good excuse for, you know, describing new species. So you see, you have some differences between those, and therefore they are different. But also, molecular markers actually did a strong contribution into a real understanding of herpetological fauna because developed a area called phylogeography. So when you develop a phylogeny, a tree of the species, and then you put this tree on the geographic map, you better understand how the species, where the species were first evolved, and how they were distributed throughout the rest of their current ranges. And this can be about species, and this can be about a bigger taxonomic units like genera or even families. And completely different story is a social media, Facebook in particular, but also some specific resources like Howitz, iNaturalist, and some others. And this is a recent publication of our joint publication with one of my students. And this is about distribution of snakes in Georgia based on really screening like a social media, like Facebooks and all this stuff, Twitter. Huh?
Like photos of animals.
Exactly, snakes, because snakes are easy, different maybe from like rock lizards. You can just, you know, identify them without just measuring skull, but just looking at the peak. And interestingly, during 2 years of scanning internet, this person managed to double the number of snake findings related to about 200 years before that. So done by all these Bedriagas and all this, you know, all these 19th century and 20th century researchers.
Would be cool to recognize some snake that has not been previously found by professional scientists.
Yeah, it were good, but we couldn't do this so far. So
more photos.
More photos, yes. Briefly, very briefly, I will not take your time anymore. It's already a lengthy talk. This is a early Pliocene map of Europe and Eastern Asia, of Western Eurasia. And you see here the land had, even in that time, about 6 million of years ago, boundaries different from the current ones. For instance, the Caucasus was in that time a peninsula linked to Anatolia and Iran and separated from the Eastern European plain. And about 5 million before that, the Caucasus was an island. And currently you can find some animals, especially from the Greater Caucasus, which obviously has an origin related to this Caucasus island. And actually, you see here different species. What is here? I cannot even... I think it's Darevskia. And Darevskia, yes, it is Darevskia browneri, a species endemic to the Western Greater Caucasus, obviously associated with the Caucasus Island, because even now it doesn't exist even in the Lesser Caucasus and in eastern part of the Greater Caucasus. It is a Caucasian viper, which probably like rather a relict center of origin somewhere at the Georgian-Turkish border, but currently is found all throughout Colchis. It is Caucasian salamander, and I already spent your time telling about this Caucasian salamander. And it is a steppe red snake, which is related to Central Asia and even Far East. So this picture shows actually the different parts of the Eurasia which contributed into formation of diversity of Caucasian amphibians and reptiles. And well, in amphibians and reptiles of Georgia, you can put them somehow in a biogeographic context. And if you see, there were many species which are found all throughout Central Europe. And recent genetic studies actually show that in some cases, these European species, widespread European species, actually most likely were spread either from the Caucasus or from Anatolia. How do you see this? If you build a evolutionary tree, the earliest branches which are first separated from the general node, normally are found in the areas when a species or a group of species has been developed. And this is true, for instance, for a smooth newt. So the smooth newt from the Caucasus, this one, is most strongly derived from the rest of newts which you found from Western Anatolia and Balkans throughout the Central Europe. In some cases, you see that it is another way around. You have a Balkan origin of some species, most likely, and the Caucasus is a secondary part of the range between them. And this circle, these ellipses show you like a more or less group of species. They are group of species like a circumpontic, so which are found from Central Europe to the Western Caucasus. They are species of Western Asia, like Levantine viper or Eastern Mediterranean, and they are species related to rather Central Asian range. Here is a Pabijan and others publication of 2014 about the phylogeny of a smooth newt, and you see here Triturus Lysotriton vulgaris lanci, and this is the most basal branch of all smooth newt trees. It means that even Vulgaris coswigi from Western Turkey is closer to the subspecies which are found throughout Europe than to a subspecies from the Caucasus.
And the lower the outgroups, right?
The lower they are outgroups, they are like other Lysotritons, small newt species. Italicus, Helveticus, Boscae, and and Triturus, former Triturus alpestris. I think it's now not Mesotriton, I forgot already. I cannot keep in memory so many genus names, yes. This is a, there are some other trees. Here is a tree of slow worms, and you see that in this case, actually Caucasian and Balkan slow worms build a single group which is separate from a Central European slow worms. Also, they are quite deeply separated, and this is actually the Sanguis colchica. They described simultaneously, they separated the former slow worm into 4 species. One is somewhere in the Greek islands, Cephalonica. Another is Fragilis from Central Europe. It's a Greca, and it is colchica now. And this one is about vipers, steppe vipers. And you see extremely high diversity of steppe vipers in the Caucasus, extremely high genetic diversity of these guys. This is they show that they are, what happened with this? Something like the separation of a common toad genetic groups. You see the yellow, this Verrucosissimus type. And here are the references on the papers. So, and finally, the most interesting prospects for the future herpetological nodes. I have strong doubts that we find a really new species in the Caucasus. Also, everything can happen. I am not very keen for separating all species into new ones if it is not really necessary. But I think that it is a very interesting story about parthenogenesis, how it functions, and actually whether or not really parthenogenetic lizards are evolutionary dead ends. In case they just only produce parthenogens, they are, supposedly. But in case there is even very rare backcross with sexual species, then it is not. Then they have a sufficient genetic diversity for continuing evolving and really successfully competing with bisexual species. Also, another thing is just a speciation in a broader sense. So you see that there are many species like lizards or snakes and so on, which appear to be morphologically phenotypically distinct, but which continue to interbreed with each other without losing their distinctiveness, and exploring mechanisms which maintain their genetic distinctiveness in spite of hybridization. So the hybrids are completely fertile and so on, but they might have, in some cases, slightly inferior viability, slightly inferior fitness. Then another very practical question, what is better for conservation? Because sometimes people which describe new species, they have an interesting argument. So don't you want that this species is protected? Like, don't you want that Anguis colchica is protected because it is a separate now and endemic species, yes? Or something like this. And therefore, from practical purpose to convince like decision makers and so on, it is good to describe a new species and see, you know, it's endemic, you find it only here, you can protect it. But on the other hand, I doubt that the protection can be really effective if you just analyze species without context of a broader range of formally different species which are actually supplying it with genes and which are supplying it with migrants and so on and so forth. Therefore, my personal opinion is more important to really understand how a species system functions rather than have these formal units. And finally, an interesting point I briefly mentioned is refugial studies. So using genetic data, using analysis of species distribution for reconstruction of ancient landscape. And reconstruction of ancient landscape actually can be interesting because you know that there is a Pleistocene, formerly it is a Pleistocene, which is Ice Age, and it is a Holocene, where we live now. But frankly speaking, we are still in Pleistocene. We are in a short interglacial period between two glacial waves. And after some thousands of years, probably we will find ourselves in another, not us, not personally, as we will not exist anymore in that time, but maybe some our descendants might see it, and it will be interesting for them to expect where they can hide themselves from coming ice shields. So, and thank you for attention, and well,
Thank you very much.
I hope thank you, I didn't
And may bother
take
you
too
with
much.
one more little question, if you didn't.
Of course, as many as you like.
There is that case of the rock lizards, which actually is very interesting because it looks a little bit like the case of the Darwin finches when you have like
Absolutely, yeah. Well, not exactly, because Darwin finches are allopatrical, you know, they are separated on different islands.
Yes, and these ones, they somehow manage to survive on a single rock,
yeah,
and apparently are not out competing each other. So is there any or do they occupy different ecological niches?
If you are really interested in the question, so please just take my either Facebook address or email address. And we have now accepted for publication a paper about distribution of rock lizards and their genetic closeness. And it appears a very interesting, very classical example of Meyer's allopatric-sympatric speciation. So obviously, speciation, original stages of speciation in all these cases is allopatric. So they were separated geographically and so on. But then it is a clear and very strong correlation between the negative correlation between the genetic distance between species and the extent of their niche overlap, spatial niche overlap, and the extent of contact between them. So species which are particularly close to each other, which have been separated less than last 2 million of years, they are never sympatric or syntopic. And in case of a secondary contact, they remain parapatric. So their ranges are contiguous and they don't penetrate into each other's distribution. Then it is another category of species which were separated like in Pliocene or late Miocene and so on, yes? And you have mutual penetration of the ranges, but separation of habitats, most commonly by elevation. So it is like two lizards, like a Ajarian lizard, like Darevskia mixta, and Caucasian lizard, Darevskia caucasica. Ajarian lizard, it's a strange name because Ajara is the only region where this lizard doesn't live. Yeah, so, and this Darevskia mixta in Lesser Caucasus, where Caucasian lizard does not exist. It goes up to subalpine belt and it's found above 2,000 meters above sea level and so on. In the Greater Caucasus, in the western part of Greater Caucasus, where there is also a Caucasian lizard, it never goes beyond the timberline. Yeah. On the other hand, this Caucasian lizard never goes into forest belt in the western Greater Caucasus, but in the eastern Greater Caucasus, where mixta is absent, it goes deep into forest belt and you find it on 1,200 meters above sea level. So they obviously limit each other's distribution. And farther, if you go farther and find more distant species, then they just easily, so it is, there are some steps of a allopatric-sympatric speciation. First allopatric, roughly, then it is a stage of a range separation, then is a stage of climate separation or habitat separation, and finally it's stage of somehow isolation without separating space. So they are, in some cases, they are of different size, and probably they are not so compatible to each other. So it's like a reinforcement, a classical case of reinforcement. In other cases, they, I don't know what, they have some behavioral peculiarities. So, I don't know if I answered your question. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay.
That paper, it's already kind of, it's published, or it's just...
It's accepted. It's just accepted a week ago, and I'm waiting for proofs.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would read it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.